The brass key had turned green at the edges. Garagos Mark noticed this as he stood on the porch of the mountain cabin, holding the small piece of metal up to the afternoon light. Oxidation, he thought automatically. 40 years of Colorado weather, of Ruth's hands opening this door season after season while he stayed behind in Denver. 3 months since her funeral. 92 days since he'd watched them lower her casket into the ground at Crown Hill Cemetery. Since Ryan had gripped his shoulder with one hand while checking his phone with the other. Since Madison had cried quietly into Tyler's jacket. 92 days of waking up in an empty house that still smelled like Ruth's lavender soap. "You need to sell the cabin, Dad," Ryan's voice echoed in his memory from last Tuesday's phone call. "I know it's hard, but Mom's gone. None of us use it. You're paying $4,000 a year in property taxes for a place that's just sitting there collecting dust." Ryan was 35 now, an investment banker at Wells Fargo with the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly what things were worth. He'd inherited Garagos's practical nature, his focus on numbers and sensible decisions. Madison had been gentler when she'd called the next day. "Dad, I think Ryan's right. I know the cabin has memories, but hanging on to it won't bring her back." A pause, then softer. "Tyler and I can drive up with you if you want, help you go through Mom's things, make it easier." They meant well. His children had always meant well. And they were probably right. The cabin was a relic from another lifetime, from when he and Ruth were young enough to believe they could make it work up here. 2 kids barely out of college thinking love and mountain air were enough to build a life on. Then Ruth got sick, or that's what they'd thought. Breathing problems, chronic fatigue, something the rural doctors couldn't quite diagnose. The specialists were all in Denver. "Just temporarily," they'd told each other while packing up the cabin, "just until you feel better." But Ruth never felt better, and temporary became permanent. Garagos got the job at Morrison & Associates. Ruth made their apartment into a home. Ryan was born, then Madison. The cabin became a line item on their insurance policy, a vague sense of guilt every time the property tax bill arrived. Except Ruth had never let it become just a memory. Every holiday, every long weekend, sometimes for weeks at a time, she'd pack her small floral suitcase and make the 2-hour drive alone. "The mountain air helps," she'd say with that apologetic smile, the one she wore when she needed something but didn't want to be a burden. "Dr. Patterson said it's good for my lungs. Just a few days, honey. You'll hardly notice I'm gone." He'd kiss her goodbye at the door, watch her load the car by herself because he had work, had meetings, had responsibilities. She'd return 4 or 5 days later with color in her cheeks and a peacefulness in her eyes that he rarely saw in the city. He'd ask how she spent her time. Reading, she'd say. Resting, thinking, just enjoying the quiet. It had never occurred to him to ask for more details. Why would it? Ruth needed the cabin for her health, the same way she needed her medications, her regular checkups, her careful diet. If it helped her breathe easier, then she should go. He could manage alone. That's what husbands did. They provided, they supported, they made things work. The key finally slid into the lock. It stuck for a moment, resistant, and Garagos had to jiggle it before the mechanism gave way with a reluctant click. The door swung inward, hinges groaning. The smell stopped him in the doorway. Pine wood, yes. Old fabric. Dust, maybe, though not as much as he'd expected. But underneath it all, lavender. Ruth's soap, the same brand she'd used for as long as he could remember. The scent was faint, but unmistakable. And for one disorienting moment, Garagos expected to hear her voice from the kitchen, asking if he wanted coffee. But there was only silence, the particular silence of mountain places, thick and textured with distance. He stepped inside. The living room was exactly as he remembered it, only smaller somehow, the way childhood homes always shrink when you revisit them as an adult. The couch they'd bought at a yard sale in 1984, its floral pattern faded to soft pastels. The braided rug Ruth's mother had made as a wedding gift, the colors still bright in the center where feet rarely trod. The stone fireplace where they'd sit on winter evenings, Ruth reading while he balanced their checkbook by lamplight. But something was off. The cabin was too clean, not just tidy, maintained. No dust on the coffee table, no cobwebs strung between the ceiling beams. The windows were clear, the floors swept. This wasn't a place that had been sitting empty. This was a place someone had been living in. Garagos moved through the room slowly. The kitchen still had the yellow curtains Ruth had sewn by hand in their first year of marriage, now faded but cheerful in the afternoon light. The small table where they'd eaten breakfast was bare except for a ceramic bowl filled with pine cones. No dishes in the sink, no food in the refrigerator except a box of baking soda absorbing odors. The bedroom made his chest tight. Ruth's side of the bed was made with hospital corners, the quilt tucked just the way she liked it. Her perfume, something floral he'd bought her years ago, lingered faintly in the air. On the dresser sat a framed photo he'd never seen before. Ruth and him on their wedding day, both of them impossibly young, grinning at the camera like they knew a secret. When had she framed this photo? Had it been here all along, watching over her during those solitary weeks in the mountains? Garagos sat on the edge of the bed, the springs creaking beneath him. What had Ruth done here all those hours, all those days? She'd said she rested, but the cabin showed no signs of rest. No stacks of books half read, no knitting projects abandoned mid-row, no television or radio to pass the time. What did she do? The question nagged at him as he stood and walked back toward the hallway. He'd been here 100 times when they were young, knew every creak in the floorboards, every quirk of the plumbing. But that door at the end of the hall, he'd forgotten about that door. Or had he ever really noticed it? The door was rougher than the others, made of newer pine that didn't match the original cabin construction. And there, mounted at eye level, was a heavy-duty master lock that definitely hadn't been there 40 years ago. Garagos stopped, frowning at it. The wood around the frame had been reinforced recently. He could see where fresh boards had been added, the nails still shiny. From behind the door came a low mechanical hum. Electric, steady. A dehumidifier maybe, or a fan. Why would Ruth need to lock a storage closet? More importantly, why would she need climate control in a basement? He returned to the kitchen and emptied Ruth's purse onto the table, the bag the hospital had given him along with her other belongings, the one he'd been carrying in the car without really knowing why. Wallet, tissues, prescription bottles he didn't recognize, a small spiral notebook, receipts from gas stations along Highway 70, and her keyring. Garagos picked it up, frowning at the sheer number of keys. 15, maybe more. Some he recognized, their house in Denver, her car, the mailbox. But there were at least 8 keys he'd never seen before. Different sizes, different manufacturers. Why would Ruth need so many keys? He carried the ring back to the locked door and started trying them systematically. The first 3 didn't fit. The 4th slid in, but wouldn't turn. The 5th, click. The lock opened smoothly, well-oiled, recently used. Garagos pulled it free from the hasp and set it on the floor. His hand was shaking slightly as he gripped the doorknob. The door opened onto darkness and a set of stairs leading down. But these weren't the rough wooden steps he remembered from the old basement. These were new, smooth pine with a proper handrail, recently built and professionally finished. His fingers found a light switch on the wall just inside the door. He flipped it up. LED lights flickered on, bright and clean and completely unexpected. Not the weak yellow bulbs the cabin had always had, but proper studio lighting, the kind you'd see in a professional workspace. Garagos descended slowly, one hand on the railing. The air was different down here. Not musty, not damp, clean and temperature-controlled. The dehumidifier he'd heard humming away in the corner. The walls were painted white, not the dingy cream of old paint, but fresh, bright white that reflected the overhead lights. This wasn't a storage basement. This wasn't even a finished basement. This was a studio, a professional artist's studio. 6 easels stood at different positions around the 400-square-foot space, each holding a canvas. Against the far wall, a long workbench held supplies organized with obsessive precision, brushes sorted by size in ceramic jars, tubes of oil paint arranged by color from warm to cool, bottles of linseed oil and turpentine lined up like soldiers. A palette with dried paint, scraped clean but still showing the ghost of colors used. Stretched canvases stacked neatly in the corner, ranging from small 8x10s to massive 3x4s. The floor was covered with canvas drop cloths, spattered with years of work, layers of paint in every conceivable color creating an abstract history of artistic effort. But it was the walls that made Garagos's knees weak. Paintings, dozens of them, maybe 80 or more, hanging in careful rows that covered every available surface. Landscapes of the Colorado mountains with light that seemed to glow from within the canvas. Portraits of people he didn't recognize, their faces rendered with such emotional depth they seemed about to speak. Still life compositions, wildflowers in old glass bottles, weathered fence posts, a collection of stones that somehow conveyed the weight of geological time. Each one was signed in the same careful script in the bottom right corner, R. Whitmore. Garagos walked to the nearest painting, legs moving on autopilot while his brain struggled to process what he was seeing. A landscape of mountain peaks at sunrise, the kind of view Ruth would have seen from the cabin's east window. The technique was masterful. The way light played across the distant ridges, the subtle gradations of color in the morning sky, the sense of depth and atmospheric perspective. This wasn't amateur work. This wasn't someone playing around with a hobby. This was professional quality art. His wife had created this, Ruth. His Ruth, who laughed and said she couldn't draw a straight line, who claimed she had no artistic ability, who never showed the slightest interest in painting or drawing. For 15 years, she'd been coming to this cabin and creating this. Garagos moved along the walls in a daze, examining painting after painting. He could see the progression of skill. The earlier works, judging by the dates penciled on the backs of the frames, showed talent but uncertainty. The brushwork was more tentative, the color choices safer. But the recent paintings, the ones dated from the last 2 or 3 years, they were extraordinary, confident, mature, the work of someone who'd spent years developing their craft, who understood not just technique but how to convey emotion through color and composition. One painting in particular stopped him, a self-portrait he almost didn't recognize. Ruth, but not the Ruth he knew. This Ruth was confident, direct, meeting the viewer's eyes with an intensity he'd never seen in his wife's face. Her hair was different, not pulled back in her usual practical ponytail but loose around her shoulders. She wore clothes he didn't recognize, a paint-stained work shirt open at the collar. She looked like someone he'd never met. How was this possible? How had he lived with Ruth for 40 years and never suspected she had this entire dimension to her life? The answer started to form in his mind, uncomfortable and shameful, as he noticed the small writing desk in the corner of the studio. The desk was walnut, well-made, the kind of furniture that suggested this studio was more than just a creative outlet. The surface was neat, a cup holding pens, a small lamp, a closed laptop, and beside the desk, a 2-drawer filing cabinet. Garagos sat in the chair, which was worn in a way that suggested years of use, and opened the top desk drawer. Business cards. A whole box of them, professionally printed on heavy cardstock. Rebecca Whitmore, Fine Art. Landscape and Portrait Studio, Eagle Peak, Colorado. RebeccaWhitmore.art. 720-5550147 Rebecca, Ruth's middle name, the one she never used, and Whitmore, her maiden name, given up when they married. His hands were trembling now as he opened the filing cabinet. The top drawer was labeled Gallery Correspondence in Ruth's precise handwriting. Inside were folders organized by gallery name: Aspen Art Gallery, Denver Contemporary, Boulder Arts Collective, Santa Fe Fine Arts. He pulled out the Aspen folder. The first document was a letter on expensive letterhead dated 6 months before Ruth died. Dear Ms. Whitmore, thank you for allowing us to showcase your Mountain Light series. I'm delighted to report that all 6 pieces sold during opening weekend. The collector response was extraordinary. We had 3 serious buyers bidding on Peak at Dawn before Mr. Hamilton ultimately secured it. Total sales, $18,400. Your commission, 70%, $12,880. The check is enclosed. We'd love to discuss your fall collection when you're ready. Warmest regards, Catherine Webb, owner. Garagos read the letter 3 times, $12,000 for 6 paintings. Ruth had earned $12,000 in a single weekend while he'd been at home in Denver, probably watching golf on TV and eating the casserole she'd left in the fridge. He pulled out more letters, gallery contracts, emails from private collectors inquiring about commissions. A glowing review from a Denver art blog calling Rebecca Whitmore one of Colorado's most promising landscape artists over 40. The bottom drawer was labeled Financial Records. His stomach turned as he opened it. Bank statements from Colorado Community Bank, account name R. Whitmore, LLC. The most recent statement showed a balance of $73,240, $73,000. Garagos and Ruth had maybe $43,000 in their joint savings account, money they'd accumulated over decades of careful budgeting, of delayed vacations and used cars and generic brand groceries. Ruth had nearly twice that in an account he'd never known existed. The statements went back 12 years, and he could track the account's growth. $500 here, $3,000 there, an $8,200 deposit 3 years ago that corresponded to a gallery exhibition. Steady, consistent income from a career he hadn't known his wife had. There were tax returns, too. Ruth had filed separately for R. Whitmore, LLC. Reported income, paid quarterly estimated taxes. Everything was legal, properly documented. She'd built this business with the same meticulous attention to detail she brought to everything in her life, except she'd hidden every bit of it. But why? The answer came in the second filing cabinet, the one with 3 folders that made his blood run cold. Ryan's education, Madison's medical, Garagos, heart surgery. He opened Ryan's folder with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Payment receipts, wire transfers from R. Whitmore, LLC to the University of Pennsylvania. 4 years of payments, $54,000 annually. Total, $216,000. Attached was a letter in Ruth's handwriting, dated 8 years ago. Dear Penn Financial Aid Office, I am writing on behalf of an anonymous donor who wishes to fund 75% of tuition for student Ryan Mark, ID number 47382, for 4 academic years contingent on satisfactory academic performance. Please inform the family that this is the Presidential Leadership Scholarship. The donor requires complete anonymity. Sincerely, Rebecca Whitmore, donor representative, the Presidential Leadership Scholarship. Ryan had been so proud. He'd come home from his freshman year talking about earning it, about how his essay must have really impressed the committee. There was no committee. There was no scholarship. There was only Ruth, quietly selling paintings to pay for their son's education while letting him believe he'd earned it on merit. Madison's folder was even worse. Medical bills from Mayo Clinic, 2018, the Crohn's disease diagnosis, the experimental biologic therapy, the insurance company's denial of coverage. Garagos remembered those months vividly. The panic, the endless appeals, the crushing weight of watching your child suffer while knowing you couldn't afford the treatment that might help. Then, the miracle. The insurance company reversed their decision. Coverage approved, claim paid in full. But here were the real records. A $45,600 wire transfer from Ruth's account to Mayo Clinic, and a note in her handwriting. Called Aetna Claims Department March 14, 18, posed as Mayo Billing Coordinator, confirmed claim MC 47382 marked Provider Adjustment, Internal Resolution. Madison will never know. Ruth had paid for their daughter's medical treatment out of her secret art income, then manipulated the insurance company into thinking they'd covered it. The last folder broke him. 2 years ago, his own triple bypass surgery, the $78,000 in out-of-pocket costs after insurance. They'd been preparing to take a home equity loan to mortgage the house they'd worked so hard to pay off. Then the hospital called. Some charitable foundation, the Cardiac Care Foundation, had reviewed his case. He qualified for their heart health grant. The entire balance would be covered. He'd cried with relief in his hospital bed. Ruth had held his hand and said, "I told you everything would work out." Now he stared at the cashier's check receipt, $78,000 from R. Whitmore, LLC, to Denver Health Medical Center. Another note, called Hospital Billing November 8, 2022, confirmed balance zeroed under Charity Care, Heart Foundation, arranged confirmation letter. Garagos will never know. Garagos sat on the floor of his wife's secret studio, surrounded by her paintings, her bank statements, her carefully documented lies. Ruth hadn't just hidden her talent from him, she'd hidden her role as the family's guardian angel, quietly solving every financial crisis that threatened them while maintaining the fiction that luck, bureaucracy, and charity were saving them. Every time she drove up to this cabin, she wasn't resting. She was working, creating, selling, earning enough to keep their family safe from the disasters that would have destroyed them. And she'd done it all in secret because, why? Because she knew. Somehow, she'd known that he couldn't handle the truth, that his sense of himself as the provider, the responsible one, the man who took care of his family, would crumble if he learned his wife was better at it than he was. So she'd protected him, protected Ryan's pride in his scholarship, protected Madison's gratitude for their family sacrifice, protected everyone except herself. For 15 years, Ruth had carried this alone. Garagos picked up the unfinished canvas from the nearest easel, a mountain landscape at sunset, the underpainting visible through translucent layers of color. The brushwork was confident, assured, the composition sophisticated. This was the work of Rebecca Whitmore, successful artist. But he'd been married to Ruth Mark, quiet housewife, and he'd never suspected they were the same person. Garagos found the journals in the bottom drawer of the desk, tucked beneath a folder of exhibition catalogs. 5 leather-bound notebooks, each spine labeled with a year: 2010, 2013, 2016, 2019, 2022. He opened the first one with the sensation of trespassing, of violating something sacred. But Ruth was gone, and these secrets were surfacing whether he was ready or not. The first entry was dated March 15, 2010. I sold my first painting today, $500 for something I created with my own hands. The gallery owner, Catherine Webb, such a kind woman, said it was one of the most emotionally resonant landscapes she'd seen from a new artist. I cried in the car for 20 minutes after I left. Not from joy, though there was that too. I cried because I wanted to drive straight home and tell Garagos, open a bottle of wine, celebrate this incredible thing that happened. But I remembered last month when I mentioned the watercolor class at the community center. He didn't say no exactly. He just got that worried look and said, "Honey, is that really necessary? We're saving for Ryan's college." The class was $75. He spent more than that on golf last month. I heard what he didn't say. Your interests aren't important. Your dreams can wait. Art is frivolous when we have real responsibilities. Maybe he didn't mean it that way, but I learned something. If I want to paint, I have to do it where no one can tell me I shouldn't. Garagos set the journal down, his chest tight. He remembered that conversation, vaguely, like background noise from a decade ago. Ruth had mentioned some class and he'd been worried about money. Ryan was 14, already talking about expensive colleges. Being practical had seemed responsible, but Ruth had heard something else entirely. She'd heard that her desires didn't matter. He forced himself to keep reading. July 2012. Ryan asked me today why I never paint. He's doing a school project on Impressionism, so excited about Monet's water lilies. I almost told him I've been working on my own water lily series, but then Garagos said, "Your mom isn't really the artistic type, buddy. She's more practical than that." And Ryan just nodded, accepted it as fact. Garagos meant it as a compliment, I think. He values practical skills. But watching my son believe I have no creativity, it hurt more than I expected. Rebecca Whitmore sold 3 paintings this month. Ruth Mark baked cookies and drove carpool. Which one is real? Both? Neither? The entries continued, a litany of small moments that Garagos had forgotten or never noticed. Each one showed Ruth trying to share pieces of herself, only to be gently, thoughtlessly dismissed. November 2015. Madison's applying to colleges. She mentioned art history at dinner. Garagos immediately started talking about business programs, law schools, something with job security and good earning potential. I wanted to say, I make more from my paintings than your father makes at his accounting firm. I wanted to tell her that creativity can be profitable, that following your passion isn't reckless. But how can I encourage her dreams when I'm hiding mine? What kind of hypocrite am I? Madison switched her major application to business. I watched her do it and said nothing. I'm teaching my daughter that women's creative work doesn't matter by pretending mine doesn't exist. Garagos closed his eyes. Madison had mentioned art history. He'd steered her toward business because he wanted her to be secure, to have options. She'd become a corporate lawyer, and for years she'd complained about the work, about feeling unfulfilled. Ruth could have changed that conversation, could have been an example of how creative work could succeed. But she'd stayed silent. The journal from 2019 showed increasing frustration. I'm tired of pretending to be helpless with money when I'm managing investments worth over $100,000. Tired of acting like I don't understand business when I've been negotiating with galleries for years. Tired of being the quiet little wife when I'm actually the one keeping this family financially secure. But I can't tell them. Not now. It's been too long. They'd ask why I lied, and I'd have to explain that I didn't lie. I just became invisible because that's what they needed from me. The entry that broke him was dated April 2021. Garages complained about money again tonight. Medical bills, the car repair, Ryan wanting help with a down payment on a house. He was up until midnight running numbers, that pinched look on his face that means he's trying to figure out how to make everything work. I have $67,000 in my account. I could solve every problem he's losing sleep over with a single phone call, but I can't tell him. Not because he'd be angry, because he'd be diminished. His entire identity is wrapped up in being the provider. If he knew I've been the safety net all these years, it would break something fundamental in him. So I'll wire money to Ryan anonymously. I'll pay the medical bills through a fake grant, and Garagos will keep believing he's supporting this family alone because that's what he needs to believe to be okay. Is this love? Or is it cowardice? Sometimes I imagine telling the truth. I'm Rebecca Whitmore. I'm a successful artist. I've been supporting us financially for years. But I know how it would go. He'd feel betrayed. The kids would be confused. They'd ask why I lied, and the answer, that I had to hide myself to keep the peace, would hurt everyone. I'm so tired of being two people. Garagos' vision blurred. Ruth had lain beside him in bed, awake while he worried about bills she'd already paid. She couldn't comfort him with the truth, so she'd just said, "Everything will work out, honey." And it always did, because she made it work. The final journal, from 2022 to 2024, chronicled Ruth's declining health alongside her artistic growth. The paintings got better even as her heart got weaker. The last entry was dated 2 weeks before she died. Dr. Chen says the arrhythmia is getting worse. The medication isn't working like it should. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of dying before they know who I really was. I've been thinking about telling Garagos about Rebecca. Maybe it's time for him to know his wife is more than just a caretaker. Maybe it's time to stop being afraid. I'm going to paint one more series, something that combines these mountains I love with the emotional truth I've been hiding. Landscapes that are really portraits of loneliness, of love, of the cost of keeping yourself small. And then maybe I'll find the courage to show him everything. Maybe. Those unfinished canvases on the easels, that was the series Ruth had been working on. 4 paintings in various stages of completion, each one showing mountains but conveying something deeper. Isolation, yearning, the beauty and pain of secrets. She'd been planning to tell him. She'd been working up the courage, but her heart had given out first. Garagos found the envelope behind the journals, marked Last Will and Testament, Rebecca Whitmore, LLC, in Ruth's handwriting. His hands shook as he opened it. The document inside was professionally prepared, witnessed by attorney James Cooper and gallery owner Catherine Webb, dated 6 months before Ruth's death. He read it twice before the words truly registered. I, Rebecca Ruth Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my artistic works and financial assets to establish the Rebecca Whitmore Foundation for Women Artists Over 40. The foundation's mission: to provide grants, studio space, and exhibition opportunities to women pursuing art careers despite family circumstances that do not support creative expression. Grant recipients must be over 40, demonstrate financial need, and submit statements explaining why their creative work must remain separate from family identity. The property at Eagle Peak shall be converted to Rebecca's Studio, a retreat center where recipients can work in 2-week residencies. To my husband Garagos, my wedding rings and the first painting I sold, these represent the beginning of us and the beginning of Rebecca. To my children Ryan and Madison, 1 painting each, your choice. May you understand someday why I couldn't show you these while I lived. I do not leave my artistic estate to my family because they never knew Rebecca Whitmore. They knew Ruth Mark, and Ruth already gave them everything she had. Everything. To charity, to strangers who would understand what it cost to create these paintings. Ruth had written them out of her will deliberately, completely. Garagos sat in the studio for a long time, surrounded by his wife's secret life, trying to reconcile hurt with understanding. Part of him felt betrayed, but a larger part recognized the truth. He'd failed Ruth so completely that she'd felt safer giving her legacy to strangers than to her own family. 2 days later, he called Ryan and Madison. We need to talk, both of you, Sunday afternoon. It's about your mother. They arrived within an hour of each other, Ryan in his BMW already checking his phone as he walked to the door. Madison and Tyler in their Audi, Madison looking concerned but also slightly impatient. "Dad, I've got a brief due Monday," she said, kissing his cheek. "What's this about?" Laura, Ryan's wife, was already eyeing the paperwork Garagos had arranged on the coffee table. "Did you get the cabin appraised? Tyler and I were thinking, depending on the value, you might consider a cash offer situation." Garagos set Ruth's small landscape painting on the table. "Your mother was an artist." Silence. "What?" Madison leaned forward. "She painted. For 15 years, in a secret studio at the cabin." He laid out the bank statements, the gallery contracts, the sales receipts. "She was successful, professionally successful, and none of us knew." Ryan picked up a bank statement, frowning. "This shows $73,000. That's what she earned from her art." "But Mom never painted," Madison said slowly. "She always said she wasn't creative. She lied." He showed them the evidence, the photos of Ruth at gallery openings, looking confident and radiant, the business cards for Rebecca Whitmore, the exhibition reviews. Madison's face changed. Not grief, calculation. "So this money, it's part of her estate now?" The question landed like a slap. "That's your first question?" Garagos heard his voice rise. "You just learned your mother had this entire secret life, and you want to know about the money?" "Dad, of course we're sad," Ryan said defensively, "but she's gone. And if there's $73,000, there's also $216,000 that paid for your education." Garagos pulled out the pen records. "Remember that presidential scholarship?" Ryan's face went pale. "What?" "There was no scholarship. Your mother paid, every semester. She let you believe you'd earned it because she didn't want to diminish your accomplishment." He turned to Madison. "And your Crohn's treatment, the insurance approval that saved your life? Mom paid $45,000 and lied to the insurance company so you wouldn't feel like a burden." Madison sat down hard. "Oh my God. My heart surgery, the charity grant, that was her too. $78,000 from selling paintings while I was in the hospital, worried about how we'd pay for my recovery." Tyler whispered, "Jesus Christ." "She supported this family for years," Garagos continued, his voice shaking. "She solved every financial crisis we faced, and she did it in secret because she knew we wouldn't respect her for it. She knew we'd see her differently if we knew she was successful." "That's not fair," Ryan protested. "We loved Mom." "Did you? Because the woman you loved, Ruth who baked cookies and asked about your day, that wasn't the whole person. Rebecca Whitmore was confident, successful, passionate about her work. And Rebecca had to hide because Ruth's family needed her to be small and quiet and uncomplicated." Madison's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't ask her to hide. You didn't have to. She watched us dismiss art, dismiss creativity, dismiss anything that wasn't practical and profitable. She learned that showing you Rebecca would mean losing Ruth's place in this family." "So what now?" Ryan's voice was tight. "We're supposed to feel guilty?" Garagos handed them the will. "Now you learn what she really thought of us." The silence as they read was absolute. "She left everything to charity?" Madison's voice was small. "She left us out completely. She left everything to women like herself, women whose families don't value their talents, women who have to hide their creativity to keep peace at home." "This is insane," Ryan stood, pacing. "We're her children. This money came from work you never acknowledged." Garagos' voice cracked. "She made this choice because she knew that you'd do exactly what you're doing now. Focus on the inheritance instead of understanding what she sacrificed." "I wanted to study art history," Madison said quietly. "I remember. And you told me creative fields were unstable." "I did. Mom could have told me she was making it work. She could have supported my dreams." "She was protecting me," Garagos said. "If you knew your mother was more successful than your father, it would have changed everything. She understood that." Madison looked at the painting on the table, a small landscape beautifully rendered. She was really talented. She was extraordinary, and she died believing we'd never appreciate that about her. "Can we at least see her work?" Madison asked. "The collection?" "There's going to be an exhibition. The cabin's being converted to an artist retreat, just like she wanted. You're invited. But you'll be looking at Rebecca Whitmore's work, An artist you never met. Ryan's anger had deflated into something that looked like grief. I thought I knew Mom. None of us did, Garagos said quietly. That's the point. And now we have to live with that. They left an hour later, quieter than they'd arrived. No resolution, no clean ending, just the weight of understanding how completely they'd failed to see someone they'd claimed to love. Garagos sat alone in the house he'd shared with Ruth for 40 years, holding the small painting she'd bequeathed him in her will. Her first sale. The beginning of Rebecca. The beginning of a life he'd never known existed. The work began the Monday after the confrontation. Garagos drove back to the cabin with a purpose he hadn't felt since Ruth died, not to preserve a memory, but to honor a woman he was finally beginning to understand. Catherine Webb arrived 2 days later in a white SUV packed with equipment. She was in her early 60s, silver hair cut in a sharp bob, wearing paint-stained jeans and an expression that suggested she didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Show me," she said. Garagos led her down to the studio. Catherine stood at the bottom of the stairs for a full minute, silent, her eyes moving from painting to painting. Then she pulled out her phone and started taking photographs. "This is museum-quality work," she said finally. "The early pieces are good. You can see the talent. But these last ones..." She walked to one of the unfinished canvases on an easel. "These are extraordinary." She was getting better every year, developing a signature style. "How much is it worth?" Garagos asked. "The collection." Catherine pulled out a small notebook. "Conservatively, between $180,000 and $220,000, but that's just the current work. Once Rebecca's story becomes public, the secret artist, the double life, the value could double. Collectors love a narrative." "I don't want to exploit her." "You're not." Catherine looked at him directly. "You're finally giving her the recognition she deserved. She chose to hide. You can choose to reveal. That's not exploitation, that's validation." Over the next 8 weeks, they transformed the cabin. The main floor became a gallery, walls painted museum white, professional lighting installed. The old furniture moved to storage except for a few pieces that gave context to Ruth's life. The kitchen became an office for foundation management. The bedroom was converted to a small reading room with Ruth's art books and journals available for visitors. The basement studio was preserved exactly as Ruth had left it. Her easel still held the unfinished sunset landscape. Her brushes sat in their jars, paint-stained and ready. Her apron hung on the back of the chair. Catherine suggested installing a glass partition so visitors could see the workspace but not disturb it. "This is where she became herself," Catherine said. "It should be sacred." James Cooper, Ruth's attorney, handled the legal work, establishing the foundation as a 501c3, creating the grant application process, setting up the retreat residency program. He was methodical, efficient, and kind in a way that suggested he genuinely liked Ruth. "She came to me 3 years ago," he told Garagos one afternoon as they reviewed paperwork. "Said she wanted to set this up in case something happened to her. I asked why she didn't just tell her family about her success, and she said..." He paused, checking his notes. She said, "They love the woman I pretend to be. Rebecca would complicate things." "She was right," Garagos said quietly. The media attention started before they were ready for it. A reporter from the Denver Post somehow got wind of the story. "The secret artist of Eagle Peak, how one woman built a career her family never knew about." The article went viral. Within a week, Garagos was fielding interview requests. Colorado Public Radio wanted to do a segment. Rocky Mountain PBS proposed a 30-minute documentary. An art blogger from Santa Fe called Ruth's story the most compelling artist narrative I've encountered in 20 years of covering the Western art scene. Garagos agreed to the PBS documentary on one condition. They had to include Ruth's own words from her journals. The documentary aired 3 weeks before the gallery opening. Garagos watched it alone in his Denver condo, hearing Ruth's journal entries read by a professional narrator while images of her paintings filled the screen. "I'm tired of being two people. Rebecca creates, Ruth serves, and neither one is allowed to be whole." The response was overwhelming. The Foundation's website received over 300 visits in the first 24 hours. Women started submitting grant applications before the program was even officially open. And then the emails started coming. Personal stories from women across the country. "I've been writing poetry for 15 years. My husband thinks I'm just doing online shopping when I'm on the computer. I'm a sculptor. My adult children don't know. They'd think it was a waste of money." Your wife's story is my story. I thought I was the only one. Ruth's experience wasn't unique. It was common. That realization settled over Garagos like a weight. How many women were hiding their talents right now? How many Rebeccas were trapped inside Ruth's? Ryan called 3 weeks before the opening. I've been thinking about what you said, about the scholarship. His voice was tight. I was so proud, Dad. I thought I earned my way into Penn. You did earn it. Your grades, your essay. But the money came from Mom selling paintings in secret. My entire education was funded by work we didn't respect enough to acknowledge. A long pause. Garagos could hear Ryan breathing on the other end. That's maybe the most loving thing anyone's ever done for me. And I never thanked her. Ryan's voice broke. I can't make it right, can I? No, Garagos said gently. But you can honor it now. You can help make sure other women don't have to hide the way she did. Madison came to the cabin a week before the opening, alone. Garagos found her in the basement studio, sitting in Ruth's painting chair, staring at the unfinished canvases. I switched my major because of what you said, she told him without preamble, about job security, about creative fields being unstable. I remember. Mom knew I loved art history. She could have fought for me, could have told me she was making it work as an artist, but she didn't, because protecting your advice was more important than validating my dreams. Madison's voice was angry, hurt. I became a lawyer to make you proud, and I've been miserable for 10 years. Your mother knew that. She listened to you complain every Sunday dinner about your job while she was secretly thriving in a creative career. Madison wiped her eyes. Why didn't she just tell us? Why hide something so beautiful? Because she thought we were happier not knowing. And maybe we were. Maybe we needed Ruth to be simple and uncomplicated so we could feel okay about ourselves. Madison looked around at the paintings. These are extraordinary, Dad. She was so talented. Why didn't I see it? Because she made sure you couldn't. She thought you needed her to be small. Was she right? Garagos considered the question. I don't know, but we have to live with that uncertainty now. The day of the exhibition opening was perfect. Clear Colorado sky, temperature in the low 70s, mountains sharp against the horizon. Garagos stood on the cabin's newly expanded deck and watched cars begin to arrive. Over 80 people came. Gallery owners and art collectors Catherine had invited. Journalists covering the story. Foundation grant applicants hoping to see the space. Ruth's book club friends from Denver, stunned into silence by this revelation about a woman they'd known for 15 years. Neighbors who'd waved to Ruth on her solo drives up the mountain, never suspecting what she was coming here to do. Ryan and Laura arrived with their 2 children, 10-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Jack. Madison came with Tyler, both of them quiet, almost nervous. The gallery was beautiful. Ruth's paintings lined the walls in chronological order, showing her evolution from tentative beginner to confident master. Each piece had a small placard with the title, date, and sale price, if applicable. QR codes linked to audio recordings of Garagos reading relevant journal entries. The center of the main room held a split installation Catherine had designed. On one side, photos of Ruth as mom, baking in the kitchen, at Ryan's graduation, gardening in their Denver backyard. On the other side, photos of Rebecca at gallery openings, wearing clothes Garagos had never seen, smiling with a confidence he'd never witnessed. 2 lives, 2 identities, same woman. Emma, Ryan's daughter, stood in front of a large landscape of mountain peaks at sunrise. Grandma painted this? Yes, Ryan said quietly. It's really pretty. How come she never showed us? The question hung in the air. Ryan knelt down to his daughter's level. Because we didn't ask. We assumed Grandma didn't do things like this, and she didn't correct us because she thought we wouldn't understand. That's sad, Emma said. Yes, sweetie. It is. Ruth's book club friends clustered together near the portrait wall. 3 women in their 60s, looking betrayed and bewildered. 15 years we had book club together, one of them said. Ruth never mentioned painting, not once. Remember when we went to that exhibit at the Denver Art Museum? Another asked. Ruth had such insightful comments about the technique. I thought she'd just read about it somewhere. She didn't read about it, the third woman said slowly. She was doing it. We just didn't know. Madison stood in front of a painting labeled Mountain Light Evening, a 5 by 3 foot canvas showing the view from the studio window, rendered in colors that seemed to glow with internal light. The placard read, "Oil on Canvas, 2023, sold $8,200. "Who bought this?" Madison asked. Catherine appeared beside her. "Robert Hamilton, collector from Aspen. He has 4 of your mother's pieces." "Can I meet him?" Hamilton was in his 60s, distinguished looking, wearing an expensive casual blazer. Madison introduced herself. "Your mother was remarkable," he said immediately. "I've been collecting Western art for 30 years. Rebecca Whitmore was developing into one of the finest landscape painters I've encountered." "Did you know she had a family?" "No. Rebecca never discussed personal matters. Very private. I assumed she was divorced or widowed. Many women her age are when they finally pursue art seriously after years of other obligations." "She wasn't widowed," Madison said. "She was just living in 2 worlds. Well, the art world was fortunate to have her." Hamilton looked at the painting. "I'm sorry your world wasn't." The words landed like a punch. Madison's eyes filled with tears. Tyler put his arm around her shoulders. At 3 o'clock, Catherine called for everyone's attention. Garagosodo stood in the center of the gallery, surrounded by his wife's life's work. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steadier than he expected. "This is the Rebecca Whitmore Foundation's first exhibition. It's also the first time I've seen my wife's complete body of work in one place." He looked around at the paintings, landscapes and portraits, early experimental pieces and confident late-career works. Ruth, Rebecca, spent 15 years creating these paintings in secret, not because she was ashamed of them, but because she was afraid of being fully seen. She worried that if her family knew she was financially successful, creative, and independent, we would either resent her or reduce her to just another responsibility. His voice caught. She was right to worry. We did reduce her, every day, in small ways, by not asking about her interests, by assuming she had no dreams beyond supporting ours, by treating practical as a compliment and artistic as self-indulgent. Several people in the audience were crying now. "I spent 40 years married to Ruth without really knowing Rebecca. My children had a mother who sacrificed her identity to protect theirs. And the worst part is, she was probably right to hide. Because look what we did when we found out. My son's first question was whether he'd inherit the money. My daughter focused on the estate value before thinking about what this meant about her mother." Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Madison looked at the floor. "This foundation exists to ensure other women don't have to make Ruth's choice. If you're here because you're hiding your art from your family, we see you. If you're here because you're ready to stop hiding, we'll support you. Rebecca's work will fund women's creative freedom. That's the legacy she chose. After 40 years of dismissing her choices, I'm finally going to honor one." The applause was long and genuine. Afterward, as the crowd thinned, Garagos found Ryan, Madison, Laura, and Tyler standing together in the basement studio, looking at Ruth's preserved workspace. "She wanted you each to have a painting," Garagos said. "It's in the will. Your choice from the collection." Ryan and Madison exchanged glances. "I don't think we deserve them," Ryan said finally. "These aren't Mom's paintings, they're Rebecca's, and we never knew Rebecca. She still wanted you to have something." Madison walked to a small canvas in the corner, 12 by 12 inches, a simple landscape of the cabin surrounded by pines. The label read, "First sale, $500, March 2010. "This one," she said, "where it all started, before she got really good, when she still hoped we might care." Ryan pointed to one of the unfinished canvases. "I'll take that one. The series she was working on when she died, because she ran out of time to finish it, and that's on us." The painting showed a mountain sunset, the underpainting visible, portions roughly sketched, Ruth's last work, forever incomplete. "Okay," Garagos said. "Those are yours." They stood together in the studio where Ruth had spent thousands of hours creating beauty while believing her family would never understand its value. "Dad," Ryan's voice was small. "I'm sorry." "Me too," Madison whispered. "I know," Garagos said. "So am I." So. 6 months later, the Rebecca Whitmore Foundation had awarded 12 grants of $5,000 each to women artists over 40. 8 artists had completed 2-week residencies at the cabin studio. Ruth's painting collection had generated over $200,000 from sales, all of it funding future grants. The PBS documentary won a regional Emmy. The Colorado Arts Council established an annual Rebecca Whitmore Award for late career artists. 3 major galleries now actively sought work from women over 40, a demographic they'd previously ignored. Applications poured in, 50, then 80, then over 100 per month. Women who'd been hiding their creativity for decades, finally seeing a path forward. Garagas had moved to a smaller condo in Denver and volunteered with the foundation 3 days a week. Ryan visited the cabin quarterly, bringing Emma and Jack to Grandma's studio, teaching them about their grandmother's secret life. Madison had started taking painting classes for the first time since college. Her first finished piece was a portrait of Ruth from an old photograph, titled "The Woman I Didn't Know." On a cold January morning, Garagos drove up to the cabin to meet the foundation's newest artist in residence. Jennifer Martinez was 52, a middle school teacher from Pueblo who'd been painting in her garage for 20 years. "My husband thinks I'm visiting a friend this week," she admitted as Garagos showed her the studio. "He doesn't know I paint. He thinks art is a waste of time." "Will you tell him eventually?" Jennifer set her supply bag down, looking around at Ruth's preserved workspace, the easel, the brushes, the unfinished canvas. "Maybe, when I'm strong enough. When I have enough work to prove it's real and not just a hobby." Garagos looked at Ruth's last painting, still on its easel after all these months. She never got to be strong enough. She ran out of time. Jennifer followed his gaze. "Then I'll be strong enough for both of us." Garagos nodded and left her to work. Outside, morning light streamed through the pine trees, the same light Ruth had painted for 15 years while hiding her brilliance from the people who claimed to love her. Now that light illuminated other women's canvases, other women's dreams. Ruth's silence had created space for their voices. Her invisibility had become their visibility. And that, finally, was legacy, the kind that mattered, the kind that lasted, the kind Ruth had chosen when she understood that her family would never give her what she'd needed most, permission to be fully, completely, unapologetically herself. So she'd given it to others instead.